Hi, and welcome to chapter 3. I want to talk about kind of convergence and divergence. Um, so we start with this idea of convergence. Convergence can come, and it basically is where things come together. Our society, to a large degree, is a converging society. You know, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, if you lived in England, you were English. And if you lived in France, you were French, and there was a channel between you, and it was hard to communicate. Somebody had to sail across that channel and bring back information, and so the cultures were very distinct. If you were in America, you were different, etc. Of course, as technology and other things have increased, the differences have come together, right? For example, just last night, played a game on Zoom with some friends in Canada. The people are 1,500 miles away in another country, and we had we spent a couple hours playing a game because they're also they're the game that we thought would be fun, and that was what we did, right? And so that is a way of bringing things together. That wouldn't have been possible, uh, 400, 200, even 100 years ago. It wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago, but we wouldn't have been able to maybe even, we may have been able to play a game via phone, but we would have paid a lot of money. Now we can do it essentially for a fee for a Zoom account every month. And so we're able to do that. And so things are brought together. And so this can happen culturally. It can be brought together by a lot of different ways, but probably the most common one is what we call technological convergence. And the idea there is that our technology is allowing things to be brought together in a way that does a lot of different things. As an example, 20, 30 years ago, you had a device that played music. You had a device that hung on the wall that placed phone calls. You had a device that sat on a table that provided picture and sound, TVs. And you had all that. Today, I have one phone that can do all of those things, right? The phone can, in fact, place calls, it can play music, it can show movies and videos, and it can do a lot of other things, right? And so that's kind of what is called technological divergence. There was previously a concept of platform, it's called platform agnostic, and the idea there is used to be things only knew one specific. Not agnostic means not knowing, and so now there's no platform gnosis, there's a platform agnosis, right? There's a platform agnosticism. That with TV, it's no longer specific to a TV. With music, it's no longer specific to a record player, CD player, tape player. That these things, one device can be done. And so there's what the author calls a black box fallacy, which is the idea that, you could someday just have one box sitting in your house that provides every way of interacting with media. Now, the reality is most of us won't have that. I like my laptop for certain functions and my phone for other functions and my TV on the wall for other functions. So I don't necessarily think I'll ever just have one device that can fulfill all those needs in the same way. But I definitely see as how each device is able to do the job of the other one. These devices are not unique. They're just maybe aesthetically different or somehow functionally different that allow me to use them in different ways. So that's what we call kind of technological divergence. There's cultural divergence or convergence, not divergence, convergence, which is where cultures are brought together. There's no longer kind of this distinction. We're all citizens of the United States. Some of the distinctions of being from the South or being from the East Coast or West Coast are somewhat evaporated as we share a common culture, and those go across international lines. Although in some ways today, I think people are more rural versus urban and other things. I mean, we definitely see political divides there that perhaps didn't exist even 15 or 20 years ago. So maybe there's beginning to be a separation. But convergence can also become in what they call participatory convergence. And that's the idea that, no longer do you have a company that comes up with a product and gives it to you. The company is constantly listening for feedback from people and recreating the product and creating products that work well. And so people are part of the process of improving it, not just one way. There's economic convergence where companies are no longer just one thing, they're cross boards, there's conglomeration, and professional convergence. And professional convergence, at least in PR, is perhaps one thing we should talk about a little bit. And that is the idea here is this chapter kind of gets a little bit more into the idea that we have with us the idea that that there's different areas of corporate communication. Corporate communication can come in the form of PR, but it can also come in the form of advertising and marketing and other things, government relations, things like that. And to a large degree, advertising and marketing and PR are usually kind of lumped together in a lot of ways because they're part of corporate communication. But PR is different in that they have different objectives. Advertising is really about trying to promote a brand and a product. It's trying to target audiences that are going to do it and persuade them. Whereas public relations is not necessarily about the products, it's about promoting the whole entire organization. It may be the workers, it may be other things. And so it's really about the organization as a whole, not just the products it produces. It's not just trying to target consumers, it's also trying to target the people within the organization to have a better opinion of the organization. It's about trying to be mutually beneficial, whereas advertising is about trying to persuade people to buy the product. It's very much self-interested. Marketing is about sales. It's about consumer and suppliers and retailers communicating with them and then making a profit. So those are kind of two very different models, but oftentimes get lumped in. Now, in order to be successful as a PR professional, you probably should relate with your advertising people to make sure the advertising is giving the company the best image as it tries to persuade people to the product. And the advertising people should probably be aware of the image the PR company, the PR end of the company is trying to do. So there should be what we call integration between these different parts of the company. But as far as advertising goes, advertising is largely about trying to sell the product, and marketing is about the process of trying to create, promote, deliver, and sell a product. And so that one is about trying to, kind of deal with the vendors and the sales staff and the customers and trying to make sure we can get the product to market. And advertising is about trying to sell it. Now, advertising is by and large a form of paid communication. You pay people to buy time or space in a newspaper and you try to have an impact. Now, as far as communication goes, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Why not? With PR, that one of the things that we try to do is we try to kind of, in advertising, it is basically paid. And so it is paid. And so there's a little bit of one issue that comes along is anything people are paying for is not always necessarily the same as something, that people say about you for free. Sometimes I'll say, the best advertising is what we call word of mouth advertising. And word of mouth doesn't come from paying people to say it, although there are companies that will pay people to go out and work at fairs and other things and talk about products. And there's even some that do a little bit more stealthy method where they put people like playing video games in coffee shops and they, and then they talk about it, but they're actually paid by the company to do that. There's some sort of things, and that's kind of a form of word of mouth advertising where it's kind of nobody knows they're actually advertising, but they are in fact advertising. But as far as word of mouth, we usually consider this to have greater credibility than anything people are paying for. And the reason why, that should be a neat, the reason why we place more value is because we assume that when you have what we would call a third party or third party credibility, what we find is, if I tell you that Diet 7-Up is tasty, Now, if I am a paid actor getting paid to do it, or if 7-Up has sent me the product to talk about, then that lacks some of its credibility, right? I mean, am I doing it because I really believe that, or am I just saying it because I want to get paid, right? But as a person, and this I've not been paid, I'm not saying it, I don't know that I think Diet 7-Up is any better than Diet Sprite or Diet Sierra Mist. And I don't know that I don't know what other products there be or a generic. I just happen to buy this. Okay, that's really all it is. But if I told you I bought this because it's the tastiest of all of them, I have no interest in 7-Up's success. I don't care if it succeeds or not. I'm just telling you what I think. I think it tastes good, right? And I do think this tastes good. And I think that tells you something about the fact that, I can trust you. You can trust me because I have no stake in this, right? And so the goal here is that there's a greater credibility placed upon that. Now, with advertising, usually the way they kind of figure out, there's sometimes what they call CPM, which is the cost per 1,000 metric. And the idea here is it's sort of like with, like if you get, 82 clicks and you pay $7 for those, then you're getting or we'll say 84 because it's easier. Then you're getting, 12 clicks per dollar for the advertising. And so that's one way to measure your advertising is you get 12 people to check out your advertising. Or maybe it's, it has 1,000 impressions per, $10 or something like that. And that gives you some idea that 1,000 people see this for every $10 I spend. But you can also do this, like if I buy a 30-second ad on the TV news or on primetime television or during the Super Bowl. And during the Super Bowl, the ad sells for like $2.5 million. I'd have to look it up. We're a little bit ahead of the Super Bowl, so I'm not exactly sure what it's going to cost, but there's 70 million viewers. Then that means I'm spending X dollars per viewer. And we usually break that down into the thousands, and we usually figure out how much you're paying per person. So there's kind of a metric, and then you can compare by doing this. You can compare like, well, a traditional print is going to give me, a CPM of 7, and TV will give me a CPM of 5. And even though that Super Bowl commercial is really, really expensive, it'll give me a return of 12. And so while it may not seem like spending 2.5 or $5 million or whatever it is for a 30-second ad makes a lot of sense, you're going, but I'm going to actually get more money out of that than I would anything else. So what happens here is you do that. Now, one thing that comes along is they sometimes in PR like to use a thing called the, let me find the exact phrasing here because I didn't write it down in my lecture notes, but they call it a AVE, advertising value equivalency. Advertising value equivalency. And the idea here is for example, if you go on tonight, and if you go on tonight and you're watching, let's just say the local TV news, okay? You're the local TV news, and you're watching News Channel 20 here in Springfield, and you turn it on, okay? And there is a 30-second ad. Maybe it costs to buy that. I don't know what it costs to buy that, but let's say it costs $10,000, okay? That's probably about right. I don't know for sure, but I would not be surprised by that. Then you know that you're spending $10,000 for a 30-second ad. And maybe you go out tomorrow and you buy a half-page ad in the State Journal Register, and you spend about, maybe $7,000 on that. That's probably about right. It might be a little bit more, a little bit less, but it's definitely going to be a lot more than you think it is. It's actually pretty expensive. And so, a half page is going to cost that much. Now, one thing the advertising value equivalency does is it says, Well, the way you can measure a newspaper, if you have a newspaper here, and this is the newspaper, it's, Herald, something like that, and it has all this, usually what they do is they have what they're called column inches. And columns are basically, when you look at a newspaper, well, I have a newspaper sitting here next to me, not by intention, but if you look over here, this is what we call a tabloid. It's got 4 columns on a page. I just had this sitting here. It's because I was painting, so I put some like a paint stick on top there to keep it, and that's why it's sitting here on the table. And so there's 4 columns on a page, right? And so this is the same thing on the back: 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns, 4 columns. So this is a tab with 4 columns. And the idea there is on this page that, they kind of always put the print into 3 or 4 columns. And you can then measure every inch of the page: 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches, so on and so forth. And every inch by the columns, if you have a page that's 15 inches long and there's 4 columns across, then the page has 60 column inches on it, right? So if you buy a half page, you bought 30 column inches. Now, what happens is if you spend $7,000 for 30 column inches, but then you get a story in tomorrow's paper and has a big photo, right? It has a big photo of somebody at your business, handing out cups of coffee, right? And milkshakes or whatever it is you sell, right? And there are all these things and people are smiling, right? And then there's a, company sells great food, as a headline. I don't know what newspaper is running that as a headline, and then they have a story underneath and a couple columns. If you were to take this and you were to say, okay, well, this is 3 columns wide and it's 15 inches deep, that's 45 column inches, and I would have paid $10,500 to buy an ad that size. Therefore, this is worth $10,500. Okay. And if I were to, on tonight's local news station, maybe I work for the college here and we have a story about all the exciting things that Lincoln Land is doing, all the classes, exciting story about LLCC, and you have that story here. And then what happens is that story is 1 minute, but I would have paid $10,000 for 30 seconds. I got a $20,000 worth of TV time. And so what they'll sometimes do is there's companies that will do it, and Lincoln Land has a company that reports this. They'll come up at the end of the month. They'll say, we have $30,500 worth of advertising that ran yesterday for free. And why do we think that matters? Because the reason those ended up in the paper was because our PR people built relationships with those reporters, and that translated into those stories, right? And so because of that, we were able to kind of figure out how to sell it. We worked with them. We did that. And so instead of our company having to buy $30,000 worth of ads, we simply put these out there and we sold $30,000 worth of stuff in 1 day. And if we do that, twice a week for 50 weeks a year, that means our PR company is getting something like $60,000 a week, $300,000 every 5 weeks. So $3 million a year. And all we do is we hire 3 PR people at $60,000 a year, pay them benefits, maybe send them on some trips and get them a nice office and some workspace, spend $300,000. And so essentially, for $300K, we can get $3 million in free advertising. And we are basically $2.7 million ahead. Really, we should hire 6 more people and we're still in really good shape, right? That's kind of the justification. Now, the negative side of this is you can't always translate. You don't control the narrative when it comes to third party, when it's in the newspaper or other things, is you don't control the narrative. Control is gone, right? You have control and it's got a big X through it. But with advertising, that control exists. And so advertising still is very nice because you have complete control of how the message gets out there. You don't have to worry about a newscaster saying something negative at the end. You don't have to worry about that. So advertising is still better than kind of third party or journalistic stories because you don't have to worry about any negative coming along with it. But because these third party entities don't have to say anything positive, when they do say something positive, that's 2 times, 3 times, 4 times better than an ad that says the same thing. And so how you can completely equivocate these doesn't really exist, but it is a metric and something that, you know, you kind of do keep in mind when you do public relations, because at the end of the day, that is part of what you're doing, is you're trying to get your company's message, image out there, and you're trying to cross over into other things. Now, the other thing is advertising is not purely about selling the product, right? It's about, you know, advertising is about selling products, whereas PR is about, you know, PR is about promoting the organization. And this can come profit, nonprofit, right? And so hopefully if people have a positive image of your company, that will then translate into sales. But the goal is not to sell itself. The goal is simply to promote the company. And so, for example, have you guys ever watched It's a Wonderful, or not It's a Wonderful Life, Miracle on 33rd Street? Is that it? What it is? And anybody ever seen that old movie, Christmas movie about Santa, whether or not he's really Santa, and they have a competency hearing, things like that. Well, one of the things in that movie is people come up to Santa, and Santa's there at the Macy's store or whatever the store is, and Santa says, "Oh, go to X, Y, or Z store," right? And he says, "That's the store you'll get a better deal on, you know, the doll," right? And so the parent goes, "Wow, that's amazing." They're really happy. And so they go across the street and they buy the doll over there. But the person comes back and says, "But I'm going to buy everything else that's of equal value over at Macy's, because I can't believe you guys saved me money on the doll by sending me across the street. That means you guys are really good chaps, and we're going to come back." And so that's kind of the concept there. That the image of the store will translate into more sales, but it's not transactional in the sense that we necessarily want it. And that's the goal for PR, is not so much to be like, okay, I have to advertise and sell this product. PR is about just promoting the overall quality of the company. And that promotion happens both within the company and outside the company, that you're trying to promote with your external publics as well as your internal publics, and even the publics within it. That the idea here is there's also more than one public, that the publics also come from the consumer, they come from that. They also come from the people you buy products from. Part of the marketing thing is getting the thing to market. And so there's publics and different relationships you have even to your suppliers. The idea here is, you know, if you make ink pens, okay? You, as an ink pen company, are going to have maybe an engineering company that does it. Maybe you're going to have, you know, you're going to have a company that supplies the spring that's in there. I don't even know where that spring is. It's down here in the bottom and it won't come out. So you have to have the spring company. You have to have the plastic company. You have to have the rubber maker for this. And you have to have the ink supplier. And so there's all kinds of different things. There's the ballpoint, which also is metal. So there's metal suppliers, there's plastic suppliers, there's ink suppliers, dye suppliers, people who supply dyes. There's people who supply the plastics. And there's all these different suppliers and different interests and different assembly factories and different companies that can produce it. And then you bring it into your company and produce it and put it together. And then you got a packaging company and the ink people who put the ink on the packaging. Wow, you've got a lot of people you got to deal with to make this pen. And PR's job is to deal with every one of those potential publics so that they have a positive image that, you know, you're not going to get too many. One of the problems is, you know, if you're a pen producer, you know, this pen is made by Pilot. Pilot probably has a pretty good reputation. If somebody comes to you and they say, "Hey, can you supply us with 50,000 of these little rubber things for people to hold it? We'll give you the specs, we'll send it out and we'll get it, you know, send us a couple models, we'll make sure it works with our product, you know, and you're going to send us these and we're going to order, you know, $1.2 million worth of these." And you're going to go, "Oh, wow, that's great. We can get started on this right away." Well, if Pilot comes to you and says, "We want to do that," but then Joe's rinky-dink pen supply comes to you and they have a reputation for never paying their suppliers and being fairly negative, you know, you're not going to be really gung-ho and get on there about the pen product with Rinky Dink Joe. So that all makes a difference. And that's where PR comes in, is it's about maintaining all of those relationships. But it's not so much transactional, it's not so much interest in that, but the goal should be to integrate those. And oftentimes we overlap those functions, but those functions are in fact separate and different. I'm going to stop here because I want to talk a little bit about journalism specifically and how that kind of plays a role here.